Yep.
My name's Nic Williams. I just wanted to chip in with my thoughts on the infamous programming language wars. They came about 20 seconds after the second programming language was developed, and they'll probably go on forever. My thought is if you can modify your programming environment, your little programming world at runtime, that's good. That's the end of my real contribution to the conversation. A lot of other people will be a bit more verbose about it than that. But you see, if you bought a house and you couldn't paint it a different colour, that would be bad. If you're a teenager and you bought a phone and you couldn't put your favourite Justin Timberlake song on as your ringtone, life would be over. And that's kind of my attitude to programming environments, because if I'm going to have to live inside this world 8 to 20 hours a day, I'd like it to do what I want it to do, especially if I change my mind. And you can't really trust programming language authors to give you everything you want, because they're not you, and because they're going to do, if you're Microsoft, they're going to do it to the lowest common denominator plus a bunch of features that no one wants. So it's best, I love just having an environment where I can mangle it to my own requirements. How do I make it go this way? Excellent. Now, that's an example of some code. We're not even going to go through it. I just thought we'd show some code just to set the tone. It's going to be... Oh, I didn't do that in the demonstration at home. Make it stop. Excellent.
Space to stop.
Space to stop. Thank you very much for that hot tip. Buy Macintosh, they're excellent. How do I make that thing go away? I don't care. There we go. Oh. You see, this is the reason I brought this as an example of creating your own environment. Ruby does not come with a modulus operator on an array. So down here we're creating an array of strings, if you've ever seen that syntax before, and we're going to apply the percentage operator, which array doesn't have, and we're going to pass it the number 3, which you can't do out of the box. But I like that syntax. I think that's good syntax, and I think if I did that, it should break my array up into blocks of 3. That's what I'd like, because it's simple, sweet, I want to do it all the time. And so that's my desirable API for a programming language. But want to do it by 2, groups 2, there's that example. And if you want to do that, there's your code. Unfortunately, you can't do that in most languages. That's why I use Ruby. And that's why I think the rest of this presentation should be pretty cool. Because ultimately, you're going to live in your programming world all day, every day. You may as well at least be able to mangle it to have a nice life. I don't know. We're all nerds, so we all think that's cool. But the whole Matrix movie was kind of, they had that philosophy. Once you figured out that you're inside the Matrix, you inherently had a conscious ability to modify it to some degree. If you're Neo, you can do it better, I guess. I don't know. I never quite followed that bit. But that's kind of the philosophy. You're inside the world, how much can you modify it? And so here's... And so there's that famous, well, I think it's famous in my little imagination, there's that part where they decide they're going to go and save Morpheus. And Neo's, he's not a very emotional man, but he says, we're going to need a lot of guns. Fortunately, they can change their world and just whip up guns, a lot of them. I don't think they used all of them, but it certainly demonstrates the idea. And so with that in mind, I thought that might be a good basis for a presentation. When it comes to modifying your world, some people call it dangerous. People who don't like the idea of metaprogramming and think it's bad, what they're really saying is they're saying it's dangerous. If it's dangerous, then these must be weapons. I like that. I think that I can wield an arsenal of heavy artillery. So I thought we should go through perhaps some of the rules of Ruby weapons. First thing that we're going to talk about is that things are made at runtime. Nothing really exists prior to runtime. So this code here is sequential statements that you can put in a script, and these are the results you get at each point. If out of the box you ask, is there a constant called foo? There isn't. 2 lines later, 3 lines later, ask it after we've defined the class, is there a constant foo? It'll say yes there is, and you can now ask for it. The point of that is that the class definition is no different from assigning a variable. It's an activity that happens at runtime, and at the start of the script it doesn't exist. And fundamentally, if you can get that idea, you can understand how much fun we can have with our environment. Just want to demonstrate that once you do define a class, it comes with a whole bunch of variables, methods. We can define our class twice. Now, in some other environments that might cause an error. So essentially what people call this is monkey patching, where we're going to define two methods, the semicolons are just there instead of return, different line separators. But you can put these 2 definitions in different files and load them up, and you're basically continually extending your classes as you wish. Thusly demonstrated at the end with the magic number 42, which I thought was cute, again, from a purely nerdy perspective. At the age of 32, I'm happy with my inner nerd, and I trust that we can all embrace it. Okay, heavy artillery. We have a class bazooka. Again, another demonstration of how you can mangle your world. Yes, you can do it in the syntax we showed before, but let's say you wanted to generate the method you wanted to generate. You were going to dynamically decide at runtime. There's just an example syntax. I'm not even going to go into all the variations. Once you've decided that, whipping up to meta magic's a thing for you to do, you'll find it all over the web, all the different ways you can modify code. So here we have the method being defined in the string. Obviously you could use that string over and over again against other classes. But before we ran this command, there was no function pull trigger. Fortunately, we've now modified our bazooka so we can, pull the trigger, which is obviously making it a more useful bazooka than it was before. But again, imagine if the system came with a bazooka class and didn't have a trigger. Wait, stupid example. But it happens all the time. Programming environments come without all the features we'd like. Fortunately, we can extend it and make them ourselves. All right. Once we've made things at runtime, obviously we want to be able to access them in a variety of different ways. So here's our class again, packaged nicely and more readably. Again, one of the complaints of being able to do monkey patching and being able to define methods all over the place is realistic, and that is, how do you find your methods when you've got something going wrong? I don't know. That's a problem for another day. I'm not even going to begin to think of how you solve that one. But we have a foo object. I don't know where the bazooka example went. A couple of different ways you can, obviously there's a standard syntax for sending a message. That's kind of the way in which we sort of refer to it. Yes, calling a method is one way of describing what's going on, but if you think of it as sending a message to an object, then it kind of makes sense that you should be able to dynamically decide what you want to send at runtime, and you can pass some parameters at the end if the method needs them. So if we can dynamically send messages, we could obviously be able to send something that doesn't exist, and you get an error. Errors are good, but we might want to do something else instead of return an error, and we'll come back to that, because the ability to capture errors and insert some additional functionality is fundamentally very exciting, certainly in my bizarre little world. All right, a couple of different dynamic things you can do at runtime. First bit of syntax, creating a new bazooka. You can obviously see I've changed my mind about what I was calling my classes, and not very thoroughly at that. So we've got bazookas into the foo variable. Bazooka's much cooler, foo was less cool, I decided. So, normal syntax is sent at the .new message, but we can create things at runtime using eval, and there's some variations with eval. Pass in that syntax, return a bazooka object, bugger it, why not just assign the whole thing inside the string as well? If you've done any advanced JavaScript, you'll see this is the same syntax that we used throughout Ajax, return JSON or different JavaScript data or JavaScript instructions from the client. Send those instructions as pure strings back to the client from the server, and you just deploy an eval to them, and you're now executing JavaScript dynamically on the client, which is how the fundamentals of how the RJS works in Rails. Okay, so very similar. If this is where I get all tickled pink. If things aren't working the way you like them at runtime, bugger it, let's fix it. But you've got to have an attitude of what's wrong and decide that you know better than the environment. I'm perhaps a little egotistical to think that I know better, but I do. So I like to fix things. If you've got a proxy, say you've got a remote object that you don't want to define up front what all the variables are on the client side, perhaps they change. Just generate a standard proxy using the catch-all method called method missing. Different languages that do support this type of behavior will probably call it something different. Python calls it something different. But it's a method. Methods we can override, and with that overriding we can add new functionality. So here's a silly example. This is the basic syntax. This is the standard one you'll probably want to use around the blocks if you want to provide some dynamic functionality, as opposed to creating new methods at runtime, which is a bit of fun. So if you just want to dynamically take erroneous messages and give them real functionality, that's the method name as a symbol, an array of arguments, and if you want to, perhaps there's a block being passed in as well. So we're going to ignore the block and say we wanted to attack certain people that need to be killed. No reason, of course. I'm sure there's honest to God good people, but it's a bazooka. Oh no, it's an action hand. I called my example suck. No consistency. I wonder if I can change it before. So, and in this case we're generating a string, but we could do anything else. Okay, perhaps if there's certain functionality we wanted to do over and over and over again, we could dynamically create a function so that we didn't have to go through this lookup. Perhaps that's a bit too excessive, but there's the best example of where this is used, where nearly everyone that's ever used Rails will have experienced, without knowing it necessarily, method missing, is on the active record class. If you've ever used find by name, find by name and, or first name and surname, and that wonderful, the ability to, instead of having to do conditional statements, and actually just be able to say, just list it out on a method, you just made up your own table, and the table's got a title, say it's a company name, a company table, companies, and it's got a title column and a postcode column. You can do find by company and postcode. I can guarantee you, having looked through the active record code, there is no find by company name and postcode. Pretty confident. And what it uses is this method missing, and says, okay, if the method didn't get picked up already, does it start with the word, let's start with the characters find by. If it does, cut up the rest of it, we'll assume their column names and do a conditional lookup. Okay? Wonderful example of making the API nicer, making you have to do less work, making your little programming world so much nicer and friendlier. Of course, no one around you knows that your world is nicer and friendlier. We've all tried to explain it to our friends that Ruby and Active Records and Rails is so much cooler, but they don't get it, and they're happy to write explicit SQL in their little programming world. So what? If they can't get it, that's fine. But if you know what's happened before, if you've looked at that code and looked at method missing on the active record class, or active record base class, and take that idea, you might be able to apply it in your own applications, or even generically, write your own plugins to make your programming world cooler. Alright, my favourite, not because it's the most useful, but because this was a problem that the use of this was because I had a problem. In my environment at work, we have a large database, a large schema of over 200 useful tables and many other tables that you probably never use. And I'm a lazy man, and I never wanted to have to write models for them all. I never wanted to have to write all the validations for them, and I never wanted to have to write, more importantly, all the associations. If you want to write them for me, that's great. But I didn't want to. And so I discovered constant missing. Now this is just an example of how it works. Basically, if you ask for a constant, and constants start with a capital letter, that's how you know it's a constant, one of the Ruby rules, then, and it doesn't exist, that gets called. So if we want to add some different functionality, we just override it. In this case, what we're going to do is if you ask for a constant that doesn't exist, bugger it, we'll just create a class. Stupid, stupid rule. I mean, why would you want to do this? It's small and fits on a slide. But here you can see some wonderful dynamic behaviour. Class is a class. For some people that might be quirky, but why not? It's a stupid explanation, but you think about it. I mean, why not? Why not have classes as a class? And you can have instances of classes, which are meta classes, and they describe the behaviour of classes. It's wonderful. So we're going to create a new one of those, and we're going to assign it to a constant. I know that looks a bit of a weird syntax, but that's just what you do. The name that we previously didn't have, we're now going to set it, so that if we ask for bazooka, and bazooka didn't exist, we ask for chunky bacon didn't exist, at the end of this method it will exist, and we'll never call this method again for that particular constant. So we create a class, assign it to a constant name, and return it. Of course, once we return it, we can do stuff with it. So, if you call chunky bacon is never defined. At the end of it, you will have a chunky bacon class. If you ask for a class called or constant called koala doesn't exist, it will return a constant, a class called koala, upon which you'll immediately call a new method, and you'll get an instance of koala. It'll have no methods, so it's a bit stupid, but again, it does fit on a slide and demonstrates some very funky ideas. And so it was with this in mind, and with Dave Thomas's presentation from RailsConf, basically Dave Thomas stood up and said, there are 23 different things that I hate, no, don't hate, 23 different things I think need to be fixed in Rails. Here are 3 of them. And he spent an hour talking about them. And one of them was the intrinsic redundancy, or the non-dryness of models. Even though all this information of associations and validations is already in the schema, why do we then go and specify it? Again, on top of the fact, we've already done it once. And I thought it was a valid point. I was walking on the road and I thought of a name. I didn't have a solution. I knew this. I didn't have a solution, but I didn't think of a name for it. Pretty stupid name. But I highly recommend sticking your name on something. Sid Meier had civilizations. That was good enough excuse for me. So, so if anyone, some people, in Delicious, where you can look at people save the bookmarks, and some of them add their own comments and their own personal use. You can look them all up and see what people wrote. One person wrote, "Great idea, stupid name." That's probably valid. But I'm sure everyone that didn't know is thinking exactly the same thing. Okay, this is a standard active record class, so they all subclass from the base class, and everything else is dynamically picked up in terms of attributes. If you wanted some associations, you'd specify them. Has many, has one, belongs to, validations, validates presence of, all those things you'd list there. Okay, and so what if you didn't? I don't know, perhaps you forgot. Perhaps you're like me and you came to a database that pre-existed and you already wanted the models. Well, okay, so the simple idea was that it's just a gem you brought in, and instantaneously, if there was a people table, you could ask for the person class, and it would pop up, return the person class, using that same idea from 2 seconds ago. But now, behind the scenes, there's now an active record tied to the people table. Okay, very cool, because now you can instantly start searching for things and doing association lookups. this is more text than I'd like, more code than I'd ever like to have to look at if I was in the audience. But hopefully we've prepared you. You know, you've seen this before. So this is the same constant missing. I'm a nice bloke. I'm going to guess that perhaps someone else has already offered a constant missing plugin. So better give them a chance to run their code first. If it's still a problem, then you know, okay, so let's say we're looking for the person. Someone asks for the person constant, doesn't exist. It goes off and does an algorithm that says, well, what is the standard active record name? It's people, based on configuration, or you can override it. And if you know, some of these legacy tables have got wacky schema names. Now the table, I mean, I don't know. Some people think they're database experts, and hence you need to put wacky things in front of your table names. There's some awful table names out there. So you may have your own algorithm for mapping decent, honest, hard-working model names like person to my app underscore person underscore table. Something stupid like that. So if it finds, based on that lookup, it finds the table, returns it, and then we create a class. The tricky part is merely that we pass active record as the subclass and so a superclass, and we go along and immediately set the table name. And you're done. Probably not something worth putting your own name on, but that's the gist. That's pretty much it. I mean, there are nuances like making, preventing recursive lookups that I've cut out of the example because that really does pollute what is already a lengthy example. But that's the fundamental idea of being able to dynamically look up models and create them. Okay? And is that readable? Because I've looked at that obviously many, many times before. No, I feel sorry for you. Oh, I even had highlighted examples. You can't trust them. I had this other idea just the other day when I was preparing this. Traditionally, you don't go into a workshop, look at all your tools and think, oh, how can I use that hammer today? Normally what you do is you have a problem, you think, what tools have I got? That hammer might be useful. Unfortunately, that wasn't what I was thinking. I was thinking, how else can I use consent and const missing? And that's, again, but perhaps it leads you to interesting problems. And I had this idea that when you have word processing documents, all the fancy, flashy, new ones would do spell check. Now, if it finds something you've spelt wrong, it doesn't kill the word processor. In fact, just saying that's stupid. That is ridiculous. Nor does it prevent you from printing the document because you spelled something wrong. Nor does it prevent you from sharing the document because it's trying to protect you from looking like an idiot. It just puts a wiggly line under it. And so I had this idea that perhaps we could have a wiggly line for code where it doesn't stop you from running your application. If you ask for a constant that doesn't exist, it does a best guess within a certain frame of error for what the constant could be. And it's not like most of us we don't have a person and a person one class. I mean, we have a person class and we have a building class. They're completely different looking. So the chance of it picking the wrong one is low. Subtle disclaimer in there. Mathematically proven to work. This is still under development, but the idea is pretty solid, I reckon. And that is, if you forgot that the class was called person, but you called it people, and you said people find all, I can't see why it shouldn't work. Right? So what it does is it returns a people class. And the gist is that basically all it is a shell overlapping the class that it found. Instantly you get all the functionality, and it works. And it works for the rest of the application. It will, of course, return some useful error messages so that you would go along and fix it in due course. But you're off and running, because there's nothing more annoying than getting 5 errors in a row where you can only fix one at a time. Fix one, run it again, it doesn't work. So this fixes them. Of course, you would be running this inside a unit test framework, but you would get 5 errors as opposed to 1 error that you fixed, and then you get another error that you fixed. I think this is cool. I look forward to finishing it and playing with it. Again, I think wiggly line is a pretty fun name. Obviously, at the end of this, you're thinking magic meta-ness is where I want to spend the rest of my life. I don't want to be productive. I just want to make my life better. Chapter 6 of Why the Lucky Stiff's book, The Poignant Guide to Ruby, is a fun-filled action-adventure of meta-ness. It's cool. Go through and do the example. It basically build a little Dungeons and Dragons game from the Ruby console, which has got to be enticing to everyone. Again, you don't have to do this stuff to get your job done, but it's got to be better than having the standard ringtone. So if you have any questions, I have no idea how long I've just spoken for. You got time?
I guess we can take some questions.
Excellent. No questions. I love it. Now someone has to ask one. Sad but true. Worst case scenario, I start asking myself questions. So I was fascinated by that.
I was just wondering about a detail, the const set.
Yep.
What does that do?
Okay, if you knew what if the other alternate syntax is just to specify the constant and go constant equals.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we normally do to set a constant. Const name equals such and such. Dynamically, you can't do that, of course. Well, you could. You could probably do an eval. Just write that. You could put that in a string. Does that make sense? I don't even know if this works. It should, though. That's the attitude. Eval. Class name.
It's not sure to work since the constants are resolved at parse time usually. So it's going to be resolved in the eval string when it's parsing the eval string, no? So it's not. I'm not sure if the parsing is done in the same binding as the evaluation is done.
In this context, though, we're creating it dynamically.
No, not with the eval. Yeah, we are. We're creating it totally dynamically.
Yep.
But that's not the same thing as doing an eval in a string, because the string will be parsed.
Even with the fancy, I'm not sure what you call that.
It's called a D string, dynamic string.
D string, that's excellent.
Or eval string.
I'm
not sure.
No,
actually, it's interpreter dependent, and they're gonna change the behavior.
That's right, we've got about 4
2.
interpreters coming along now, don't we? So plus the JRuby one. It'll be fancy. Perhaps you can show us a JRuby demonstration what it does.
I'm not sure actually.
But that should work. If it doesn't, we'll raise a ticket. Excellent. Thank you very much. Thought that was good.
Huh?